This video will focus on NC.5.NF.1, specifically subtracting fractions with unlike denominators, having related denominators such as halves, fourths, and eighths, or thirds, sixths, and twelfths, or fifths, tenths, and hundredths. We will solve two problems in this video. For this problem, we will be solving 2/3 minus 1/6. To start our problem, we will be drawing a rectangular representation of each fraction. We will start by subdividing our whole into 3 parts. We have subdivided our whole into 3 parts and have shaded 2 of them so that we have a representation of 2/3. We then subdivide our other whole into 6 parts and shade 1 of them to represent 1/6. We now have a pictorial representation of 2/3 minus 1/6. Our next step will be to find a common denominator. Although many people think that we should find the least common denominator, that is not always necessary and is not an expectation for this standard. If I subdivide each of the thirds into 2, I realize that I now have 6 parts, with 4 of them being shaded. So I have a new fraction of 4/6 that is equivalent to my original 2/3. 1/6 does not need to be subdivided because I now have the problem 4/6 minus 1/6. And I simply need to subtract 1 of the 6 from my representation of 4/6. When I subtract 1/6 from the 4/6, I see that I have 3/6 left. Some students will recognize that this is equivalent to 1/2, but it is not an expectation for them to be able to do that. I can now see that 4/6 minus 1/6 is 3/6, or 1/2. The next problem we will be solving is 3/4 minus 5/8. To solve this problem, we will once again begin by drawing pictorial representations of each fraction. This time, drawing one represented horizontally and the other being represented vertically. We now have a pictorial representation of 3/4 and 5/8. Although many people think that we need to find the least common denominator, that is not always an efficient strategy, as not all students will recognize what would be the least common denominator. An easy way for students to find a common denominator is to think of it as overlaying a grid in the opposite direction for each fraction. So I will draw vertically the eighths on our 3/4 to create my new denominator, and horizontally the fourths on my 5/8 to create my new denominator. As you can see, I now have a denominator of 32 in each of my fractions. And my first fraction, 3/4, becomes 8, 16, 24 out of 32. And my second fraction, 5/8, becomes 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 out of 32. So I now have 24 out of 32 minus 20 out of 32. In my new equivalent problem, 24 30-seconds minus 20 30-seconds, I am able to cross out 20 out of my 24 and show that I have 4 30-seconds left in my whole. Some students will recognize that this is equivalent to 1/8, but that is not an expectation of this standard.